Hello, hola, ciao. Thank you to everybody for joining to today's in-service podcast edition. I am Gerardo Pelayo, Vice President of Research and Advisory at Service Council. And today I'm excited to welcome Alex Kablanian. He's the General Manager of Commercial and Construction Markets at ServiceTitan. Alex, just a quick wave of the hand. Thank you for being here today. We'll get to know you better in a little bit. But first, let me do a little bit of introduction and housekeeping. So today's topic, unlocking growth with preventative maintenance, a very critical one. One of the latest research efforts that we wrapped up and delivered highlighted how organizations are prioritizing their ability to predict what the install-based maintenance needs are at scale, and therefore to proactively trigger some service events around that. And it gets us thinking into what is the most efficient way and the most effective to drive everybody's experience mechanism in order to achieve this, to take advantage of the data, the technology, make sure that we're not forgetting people in the whole equation, whether they're on the service delivery or the service reception side of the house. So we're going to get into all of that and how it can all make sense from a business perspective as well. Very excited to dive into that. Housekeeping before we jump on the conversation itself. This podcast edition will be recorded as usual, so that you can go back and review some of the comments, share with your peers. So it's going to be available throughout the different platforms that you all love and consume on a normal basis. And for our LinkedIn listening audience, we invite you to be a participating audience as well. There's the option to comment. And Alex has candidly agreed to think on his feet as those comments start to pop in. So if you agree, if you want to react, expand on any of the conversation that we're having, happy to bring this up to the surface and elaborate on that. So without further ado, Alex, I've had the chance to start to get to know you and what you do at ServiceTitan. But for some of our listening audience, it would be great to hear about your personal background and what is the role that you do over there.
Definitely. Thanks, Gerardo. Great to be here today and great to be with everyone who's out there listening. I'm Alex Kablanian. I'm the general manager of our commercial and construction markets at ServiceTitan. In a nutshell, what that means is from product development and engineering through to marketing, sales, implementation, and customer success. It's my job to make sure that this segment of the market is getting the best product and getting it delivered in the best way possible to help them realize outcomes. And so it's a big privilege and it's a big responsibility that I'm lucky to be able to have. And I've been with the business here for 5 years now, more recently taking over this role over the last year and a half.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a broad spectrum. I can tell that you wear a number of hats on any given week based on that description. And I would like to make a double click on what you say ServiceTitan does for its clients. So how is it, if you can expand on how is it that you engage with your customers in order to achieve this type of outcomes that you were describing?
Definitely. And so for folks who aren't familiar with ServiceTitan, ServiceTitan is the premier software for specialty contractors. We really specifically focused on contractors and trades businesses. And we often call ourselves the operating system for these businesses because we do everything from scheduling, dispatching, invoicing, contracts, estimation, quotes, payments, you name it. It's a really unique business. It's a really unique industry. It's pretty funny. I prior to coming to ServiceTitan, I was working at Apple, so doing consumer hardware, and now I've flipped over into software for contractors. And candidly, this space is far more interesting than what Apple was doing. So I'm lucky to be here. And I think the story I like to tell folks about ServiceTitan is it's a business that was founded in the trades and built for the trades. So our two founders, Ara and Vahe, they started this business. They like to say 2012, but it was really 2007 because their parents were contractors themselves, one commercial, one residential. And so they actually designed the software to solve for their parents' needs way back, 15, 16 years ago. And thankfully for all of us, and thankfully for me, their parents are not our only two customers anymore. We have something like 10,000 contractors using our software, and well over $50 billion that's flowing in terms of their revenue through our platform.
That's very interesting. I love that origin story, and it's actually a great segue to my first question because we talk about growth through these preventive maintenance agreements. But taking a step back is, do we really understand what do we mean by preventative maintenance and what is it for? I see that there's a massive difference regarding of the topic that we're talking about between being able to do something and should we be doing that, and that right fit, that understanding the context from within can make all the difference in the world. So we one of the previous guests in the podcast mentioned that in the absence of clarity the brain responds from the same place as mistrust. Let's start by building that trust and maybe sharing with the audience, what do you mean by preventative maintenance agreements, and what are some of the misconceptions that we should get over?
For sure. And for the audience that doesn't know what a PMA is, which is like the acronym that we typically use for it, the way I always like to equate it is it's the difference between going to the emergency room and then having your annual physical. And so historically, a lot of contractors will do on-demand service work. So if something breaks, a customer will call and say, hey, my HVAC unit is broken, RTU 15 is broken, floor 15 is not getting the airflow that it needs. And a lot of contractors typically react to that. The way I like to think about preventative maintenance agreements is, how do you stop that call from ever happening in the first place? And the best way to think about that is signing a single year or multi-year agreement with your own customers to regularly, routinely have high quality service of all equipment that is on site, to ultimately make sure that these things are operating at 100% uptime. And so I think when I think about misconceptions or myths when it comes to this, there's two things that pop to mind. One is it is a good thing for equipment not to break down. I know that people always like to have on-demand service calls, but it is a show of quality of your own work, wherein you can point to 100% uptime, and it will help you win more business over time, both with that customer and also with others. And I think the second one is, I've heard different things throughout the industry about certain folks using preventative maintenance agreements to win more work, which is absolutely something that everyone should do. But that does not mean that you need to run these things at low margin. These can be 50% gross margin pieces of work. And there's something that you can feel comfortable increasing the price of over time as you continue to show your quality and dependability. And so for me, this is, one of the cornerstones of any commercial contractor's business, to make sure that they have a really well-oiled, functioning PMA team, department, and process, because that builds the foundation for having a great long-term business.
Yeah, and elaborating on that, I would perhaps add to all of what you described, doing it efficiently, because every time you do some preventive maintenance, one of the pieces of feedback or roadblocks that I've come across is, well, my asset probably needs to be down during that time. It can be disruptive to my operation, so it needs to be done frequently enough that you prevent those catastrophic failures, those higher impact situations. But it shouldn't be done so much that the waste or the medicine is worse than the disease. And I'm sure that as we go through the next part of our conversation, we'll get into how do we arrive at that conclusion, and how can we leverage the data, the history, the technology in order to make the decision in a smart way.
Yeah, Gerardo, it's a good point. Like, ultimately, the way I think about it is we're in an uptime game, right? And so the best way to prevent downtime is make sure there is no catastrophic failure. But if you're preventing that by being there every day, and there's 30 minutes of downtime every day, you're going to get to the same outcome in terms of uptime. So there's definitely always a balance there. But how do you make sure you're doing the thing as efficiently as possible to minimize that gap?
Yeah, no, indeed. And so as service leaders are thinking about how to do this in a better way than what they've been doing it in the past, new technology exploration is a major focus area for service leaders. We conduct on an annual basis our service leaders agenda research, and in 2024, 36% of them had that technology exploration as part of their focus areas. We currently have our this year's version in progress, and at least 1 in 4 are along those lines as well. So when it comes to the adoption of these preventative service agreements, what would you say is the role that technology can play in getting this processes in place? What is the value that it can deliver?
Well, how much time do you have? I'm just kidding.
So let's keep it under an hour.
No, I think about it really as four big buckets that I think technology can really help with. One is, how do you optimize the sale of the agreement? How do you optimize the actual work being done on the site by the technician, so the product itself? How do you optimize the information sharing between the customer, the technician, and the back office? And lastly, and maybe most importantly, how do you optimize the retention of that agreement over time? And I think technology has a really unique way to help all four of those buckets. On the sales side, for me, one of the most important things technology can do is let you understand what are the types of agreements that are most profitable for you. For instance, certain contractors do better with high-rise buildings. Certain contractors do better with educational facilities. Certain contractors do better if there's less than 10 units that they're doing in any given time. Some do more, better when there's a crew on site. So being able to arm data of who are your most high value, high margin, high customer experience contracts, so that you can then go and find more of those using the prospecting tools that exist out there to help you narrow down those fields. So that's sort of bucket one. How do you get more high quality, high service work? The second one is actually probably the nearest and dearest to my heart, because there's no point in pouring gas on the sales fire if you're not actually doing the work with high quality. So a big chunk of what we spend our time focusing on at ServiceTitan is, how do we make sure that the techs who are in the field can do their work as efficiently as possible? And for me, there's a couple ways we can do this. I think one is, make sure you're sending the right tech to the right place at the right time with the right materials, which is easier said than done. I think, with any big business, there's many of these happening at the same time. So being able to really have targeted information about who needs to go and do what at any given location is sort of like name of the game number one. And then the second point is, once they're there, how do you make sure they're doing their job as quickly as possible? And so I think about this a lot in terms of, how do you actually help a technician diagnose and know what to do at a specific asset itself? And then importantly, when it comes to things like information gathering, how do you make it such that technology is helping, not hurting? So scanning nameplates of assets, having voice to text updates on what are the tasks that are being done, templatizing a lot of the forms that need to be filled out, so on and so forth, such that the tech can spend all their time, turning a wrench, less time doing some of the administrative stuff. And then the last couple of buckets kind of tie this all together, which is, there's a wealth of information being gathered on site. The tech is doing stuff. The techs are doing things. Ultimately, if you want to deliver an A+ customer experience, the question becomes, how do you package that and deliver it back to your own end customer, whether it's the facilities manager or the owner of a specific business or building, to ultimately let them know, you asked for an A+ service, we delivered an A+ service. Here's what we did. Here's what we found. And importantly, here you have it all in a very timely way, because we have very strong connectivity between our field, our back office, and you, customer, to let you know all these things are happening. I think if you do all those things, then what happens is, at the time of renewal, you have a really great track record of delivering an A+ experience. Plus, you have a wealth of data that says, here's what we did for you this last year. Let's talk about how much value you just got from being under contract with us. And let's talk about how we can make that relationship last even longer. There's a lot more, obviously, that we can do. Those are like the four big buckets that I think about a lot. And for me, this is near and dear to my heart, because, putting my first hat on, the product hat, this is what we spend a whole bunch of our time thinking about, optimizing every single step of this funnel. Not just to help our customers, but we help our customers deliver a really strong experience to their own customers, which, I think is something we can all strive for.
Yeah, no, that's a really good framework, and a lot to unpack there. One of the things that caught my attention is, you talked about what are the agreements that make sense to you to pursue. And this takes us away from that shotgun approach of, I want to cover everything and I will have the same offer for everybody. This week, we were at the Manitoba company, Crane Operator. They hosted one of our events that we do. It's the Service Journey Days. We workshop through a problem, and we were talking about how to take service parts from a defense to an offense mindset. And and it follows the same philosophy that you were advocating, which is what are the use cases that make sense for me, so that I can grow my business, not just try to drive revenue blindly, but actually have the right data to feel confident about where you are investing, and where you are being more aggressive in pursuing a different type of relationship with your customers. So I thought that point is really critical.
Yeah.
And before we get in, sorry, you had a comment there.
No, I was gonna say that's a great point you bring up, and like one example that comes to my mind too is I was recently talking to a customer based out of Texas, and we were looking through a lot of the data that exists in ServiceTitan on some of their agreements, and I pointed out to them like, hey, you're recording the types of buildings that you're servicing here, and you have all the agreement data, revenue, profitability. Like, let's look through this and correlate some of the stuff. And what they found was they are actually taking a bath on some of their agreements that are being done at college campuses in particular, because the amount of time being spent by technicians getting to and from different buildings. And so they started thinking about, is it better for them to start optimizing to sell more single building type agreements, because it's actually a more efficient use of tech time. And so, very similar conversation to what you just described.
Yeah. And before we get into the, because that A plus customer experience, as you described it, I want to double click on that. But one thing that I'm curious is, within the trades industry, all of these value added possibilities for technology are resonating with me. Where do you see the investments, the interest gravitating towards? Is it the end to end? Is it more on the what are the right service agreements, the efficiency? What does that picture look like?
Yeah, are you? Let me just make sure I
Let me try
clarify.
to rephrase the question.
Yeah.
So that was a mouthful. So I'm curious of, where are you seeing most of the activity for the customers that you're engaging? Is it more about making sure that I'm driving towards the right type of contracts, or is it more around efficiently delivering against the contracts that I have?
I would say the historical focus has been in category number two. And I would say it's category number two because a lot of folks already have just multi-year, we're talking sometimes 20 years of just a relationship built up with customer X. And they're more curious about, how do I do that piece of work as efficiently as possible before I then add fuel to the fire and grow the base. The other area, there's actually a third category that there gets a lot of focus, which is, how do I get as much high quality pull through work from my existing customers that are under agreement, whether it's project work or service work that's outside of the agreement. I would say those are the two areas that we see our customers spend the most time thinking about. The area that I think ServiceTitan can uniquely add value is not just those two, which are incredible, but also the former. So a lot of what we're pushing our customers to is, we can help you get more efficient because you absolutely should. We can help you identify more work from the existing relationship and customer because you absolutely should. But let's also talk about, how do we get you more and more of the customer that you like and that likes you the best, because that's how you turn something into, one agreement into a full, feedback loop and life cycle that makes a ton of sense.
Got it. And so, expanding on that, interestingly, customer retention and growth is the number one element that service leaders are quoting as the most critical to improve the performance on during 2025 relative to what they saw in the previous year. And that often calls for challenging your own assumptions and thinking differently about how you're driving the customer experience. Can you share a little bit of, in your context, what is it that the most sophisticated organizations are doing in terms of that customer experience to deliver? And again, I'm going to quote you on that, A plus customer experience.
Yeah, I would say the most sophisticated organizations, they think about this as their main responsibility, which is, they're in a build trust and deliver quality game. Like, that's what they care about. They're ultimately signing these agreements that will put them on the hook, ideally for many years, to deliver great quality of product and do so in the right way. And so I would say retention becomes one of the most important things they care about, because that also then impacts their reputation in their market to be able to go and win more work. So this is definitely very high up on the list. I would say the most sophisticated customers think about this in multiple ways. Way one is, how do I make sure I'm upholding my contractual commitments first and foremost. So a lot of these contracts will have things like SLA mandates. If you do get an on-demand call for that customer, you have to be there in X hours. And so being able to make sure you're adhering to that is very, very high up on the list. Making sure that your preventative work that you're doing is done in the windows you said it would, in the time you said it would, by ideally the person you said who would do it, whether it's a preferred tech or a preferred crew. And then probably the most important thing is, getting back to my point about selling uptime. At the end of the day, if you're renewing these things on a yearly basis, or maybe once every 3 years, you want to be able to prove that you did what you said you were going to do. And the most sophisticated contractors are actually building things like year-end reports, 12 months, last 12 months activity. What did it look like? And they actually turn this not into a, look, we said we did what we were going to say we're going to do, but we said we did what we said we were going to do. And here's what we found about your specific property. We actually found that we did way more work on these 3 units, which was great for our bottom line. But to be clear, customer, this is not a good thing for you. You're spending way too much money on servicing these pieces of equipment. We actually recommend that you change that. And so being able to move from not just someone who upholds their commitments, but someone who upholds their commitments and becomes almost a trusted partner of sorts, to be able to work with one of their customers and have like a long-term, CapEx or strategy planning. That's the best way you can retain a customer, because then they're going to say, great, we appreciate you looking out for us. We appreciate you finding us. We actually want you to do that work. And then once you do that work, guess what? You're going to be servicing those assets for many years to come too. So I would say the most sophisticated customers think about that life cycle as a, multi-year, sometimes even multi-decade relationship, with renewal being simply almost like a yearly check-in in terms of making sure that they're upholding their commitments and they're being a good strategic partner to their own customers.
Yeah, and I love how that trust element cannot and should not be understated. Having moved cities for over 5 times in the last 20 years, it's like finding your car mechanic, right? You ask for recommendations and you build that relationship, because it's an area that perhaps you don't understand fully, and you're relying on them to say, you need to do this, you don't need to do that. So that's critical in order to move from that transactional mindset towards this long-term relationships that make sense for everybody. And as we explore that, artificial intelligence, I mean, it's everywhere right now. And I wonder, is there a place, or what is the place for artificial intelligence in this context? Because it actually maps very strongly to what we were talking about, trust in our 2025 State of Artificial Intelligence Service Technology Research. 74% of respondents, when we ask what would it take for you to confidently scale your AI investments, it came back to improving the customer experience. So can artificial intelligence help accelerate this part? And maybe if you can mention some examples of how it's happening or how you're envisioning to happen in the near future.
Yep. Yeah, AI is definitely top of mind, one for old tech companies, but also for ServiceTitan. I'm actually an AI rendition of Alex right now. I'm just kidding. But no, our CTO, Anmol, he actually came from Salesforce, and he used to lead Salesforce's AI product, Einstein. And so when he joined 3 years ago, he really started pushing the AI narrative at ServiceTitan. And when we think about it at ServiceTitan, it is in this exact context. It's not AI for AI's sake. It's how do we help AI deliver better outcomes for our customers, which can include helping them deliver better outcomes for their own customers. And so we call it AI, automated ROI, AI, and so that's how we always think about anything we choose to bring into the product. A few examples that jump top of mind as it relates to customer experience here. We announced at our big user conference 3 months ago that our mobile application for our technicians will have a new functionality that we call Field Assist, which is effectively an interface for technicians to ask questions about specific assets or the history of assets, such that they can get the information about work that's been performed there historically in seconds. And I think this ultimately translates to a good customer experience in a couple of ways. One, you stop you reduce the amount of time a tech's actually on site because they're getting the information they need without calling the back office, without trying to mine through a bunch of paperwork at their fingertips. They're able to pattern match on site. So they're able to say, hey, I've been here 4 months in a row, or someone's been here 4 months in a row fixing the same problem. I'm going to make a flag to the team in the back office that they should have a conversation with this customer around how do we better optimize your uptime by changing something. And so if you can get some of these AI-oriented tools in the hands of people performing work, it arms them with more ways to be able to be more helpful to the customer, even if it's not directly interacting with them. The other way is, I think about a customer experience and professionalism as, different sides of the same coin. And so I love our technicians. They're amazing. They're not always the best when it comes to summary notes, what happened on site, what were the learnings. And so we see AI as a big help for the office and the technicians such that they can do their work. They can say all the things that they did, but then ultimately you can flip that into a work order summary or an invoice that's very professional and tells the customer exactly what was done without having to spend hours trying to write up something professional. It does it automatically by clicking a button. And then the third area I think about a lot is, I think about this because of, sorry, you want to say something?
Yes, I actually want to interrupt you because, again, there's a lot to unpack there, and I just couldn't wait. When you were talking about the field service engineers and getting the right data to them, I have to emphasize the importance of the right data, not more data. We conduct a very large scale research effort on an annual basis called the Voice of the Field Service Engineer. Over 3,000 responses typically on an annual basis on that. And 41% of the technicians say that the amount of data that they're receiving on their mobile devices is too much. That is worrisome because when you have too much data, it's almost equivalent as having no data.
Yep.
It takes more time to look for it if you decide to look for it at all. You might, which is what we see, go to secondary sources. You start to call your peers. You try to troubleshoot it in your own terms. So having the right amount of data rather than just pushing more data is what is going to make a difference in the technician's mindset. Yep. And to your second point about capturing data, I did want to comment, and maybe this will trigger some additional stories on your side. But in fact, paperwork and admin tasks, it's the number one source of friction on an annual basis for technicians. 30% of the respondents in last year were calling this out. And there is some good news. So this proportion has been going down year over year, but it's still number one. And so while there's some of these improvements and the alignment of workflows, the automation has made things better for technicians. Do you have any reflections on why is it that it's still such a big source of friction, or is it also the case in the trades industry, perhaps to a larger or lower extent from your perspective?
Yeah, let me talk on the second point first. I think it's a big issue for two reasons. One, the level of technology adoption generally in this industry is not where we want it to be. It's the reason ServiceTitan exists as a company, as an example, and it's the reason that other companies who are trying to do similar things exist. And it's sort of our mantra. Our mantra has been, technology has left this industry behind in a lot of ways. How can we help bridge that gap? So I think one, generally technology adoption is a big problem. Now, the second big problem that we see a lot, that we spend a lot of time thinking about, is even in companies that have adopted technology, do they have the persona-specific workflows to make the adoption very easy to use, such that it's not just a checkbox, but there's a high degree of utilization, and with utilization, the right outcomes. And so I'll give you a specific example. Let's talk about a tech in the field who finds a new piece of a new asset on a site that they're servicing for the first time. Now, a technician that's not using any technology probably has, paperwork. He has a clipboard. He's going to whip it out. I'm going to write down the serial number, the model number, the condition of this equipment. And then eventually when I make it back to the office, I'll submit it and someone will do something with it, right? Maybe it goes into a record. Who knows? That's sort of the no technology world. There's a middle technology world of, hey, I have this mobile application, but it's kind of like a notes app that doesn't really do much for me. And I'm going to type in a bunch of information that is about this new asset that I found. It's not contextual. It has very little information. And I'm sort of just putting in what I think is best. That's sort of the, hey, I've adopted technology, but I'm not using it to be persona specific and maximized. Our approach is maybe like a third way of thinking about it, which is persona specific. We know techs will be dealing with assets on a regular basis. We know assets have nameplates. Why don't we build technology such that they just take a picture of the nameplate and it auto-populates a bunch of the information about it such that they don't have to do anything else apart from take a picture. The back office has all the information they need. And the next tech who comes out can just scan the same nameplate and have the full history of that specific asset at their fingertips without having to spend a bunch of time rifling through papers or going through unorganized, notes apps for the last 20 years, right? And so we're a big believer that if you don't deliver persona specific, workflow specific, industry specific use cases, then technology may not be the answer. It may just be the next step in something that's inefficient. And so it doesn't really surprise me that the mental stress hasn't really improved, because I think those persona specific use cases are still areas where, we can all candidly improve.
Yeah, no, indeed. And that part that you talked about, mental stress, to me, it's how we have to think about the technician's experience as a whole, and not just in terms of productivity. Specifically, 1 in 4 of the technicians that responded to the survey saw value in technology to become more efficient, but said that technology was not helping them to reduce their level of mental stress. And that means that the workflows, as you said, are not being created really for them. It is just for the outputs that they create, not for the overall experience.
Yep.
And trying to put some numbers behind what the North Star should be, or what the current state is, because this data capture element, it's been so prevalent that it's very interesting to me. In the research that we conduct, high tech, medical devices, healthcare, oil and gas, energy, industrial manufacturing, all of these are highly represented in our sample. And the average time that technicians report spending on data capture is 52% of their day-to-day work. So essentially half of the time. This is even higher for those that are 34 years or younger. So as we think about the talent crisis and all these technicians retiring, the problem is not getting better, it's getting worse for the newer generations. I'm again curious if you have any expectations, perceptions, what have you learned from your customers, and what does this look like from a trades perspective? Is it also a similar half the time I feel like I spend capturing data, or where do they stand?
That's a very scary stat. It's honestly like, it stops my heart a little bit to see something like that, to think 50% of your job is actually not doing your job. And so I'm thinking about the movie Office Space with the TPS reports. It's like where my head's going right now. For us, I think generally for our industry, the paperwork is lower, but there's always ways to make it even lower, in my opinion. And so what I mean by that is, information is a treasure trove. It is highly valuable, but the question eventually becomes, are you getting as much value as the investment it's taking to get that information? And for us, we always think about it as like almost like a seesaw of sorts, which is, we know getting this information is valuable, but we know it's going to take more time. Something has to change. Either you make the information even more valuable, or you decrease the time to capture it such that the ROI starts to make a lot of sense. And so, again, if I go back to the same example I was using about the asset information, it is a treasure trove of data for a contractor to know the assets that are under service for them across all the different buildings and properties that they serve. But if the only way to get that is for a technician to spend, 10 minutes per asset writing all that stuff down, there will be a diminishing return eventually, where someone will say, it just ain't worth it. I'd rather have, 3 extra tech days tech years in the field than the aggregate amount of time it takes to get this information. So for us, we always ask that dynamic. How valuable is it? Can we make it more valuable? Can we make it as easy as possible to capture that data? And a lot of times, when we tailor our workflows for our technicians, we'll cut out things that we say is not important. Like, when we go through implementation with customers, we say, customers like you, they ask this, and this question of their technicians in the field. This is how you should configure, and this is the amount of limited information you should give your technician to get the things that are high value for you. Don't overwhelm them with 50 different things that they have access to do. If you only care about these 3 things, only give them access to those 3 things and make that part of your SOP. And that will give you the value you want for the level of investment that you're willing to maximally input there.
Yeah. And one of the specific use cases for that data interaction, and you sort of brought it up earlier when you talked about the pull-through revenue, is how can technicians capture the customer feedback and the net new opportunities? This is unsurprisingly, this is another question that we ask for in our research, and 1 in 3 technicians say that their company is not making it any easier to capture this type of data. And so as we think of how can we uncover what those opportunities are, get the pulse from the field, we can have all the strategies and the wishful thinking at the strategic level. If we're not improving the experience on the ground, it's going to be very hard to identify those opportunities. Can you share maybe some of the best practices again in the trades industry from your experience, or perhaps some success stories for how that data capture can be made more accessible, a friendlier experience, but also there's a change management component there, right? So how do you make it so that the technician is motivated to capture that information?
Yeah, that's a great question. We spent a lot of time thinking about this in the spirit of helping our customers expand their own businesses. So I think there's 2 prongs to this, which is 1, how do you make it easy for the technician? And then 2, how do you properly incentivize them? There's obviously a famous saying that, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. So I think first and foremost, starting off with a culture shift from a company perspective to say, hey, technician, you're not just there to turn a wrench. You're there to turn a wrench and spot opportunities is one big mindset. And the way we've seen that be really effective is doing things like spiffs, or specifically if there's a big sale or quoted job that comes out of an opportunity that a technician flagged, giving them a percentage of, whatever the job value ended up being. That's one of the most important incentives that you can possibly do. That will only work if you also make it easy for them to spot these opportunities. And so the 2 ways we think about this are there will be asset specific opportunities and then location or customer specific opportunities. And what we've built in our technology, at least, is, you're already going through and doing all the tasking and all the work for an asset when you're out there for a preventative maintenance agreement. It should take you 1 extra click to say, hey, there's an opportunity on this specific asset that someone needs to look into. And here's my quick memo notes of what I think is wrong with it and what we can do with it. And that can instantly flag to someone in the office to have a salesperson reach out and quote, either a repair, a project, a fix. And you can mandate that. You can build that into a technician workflow such that they can't go on to the next step without doing that. And you're doing it not to add steps to them, but you're gating a workflow such that they know exactly what they need to do to be able to get to that outcome. The other way we've seen it is a different gate would be at the end of a specific appointment or visit or job, mandating a extra opportunity form or workflow that pops up that prompts the technician to say, hey, look at these 3 things for this customer. Are any of these things true? Have you seen equipment that is not under agreement? Have you seen any busted equipment that you think is worth working on? Does this property manager have other buildings that they've talked to you about? Fill those things in. And if any work comes from it, we will reward you and incentivize you based on the outcome there. So I think if you make it easy for them, just build it into their typical workflow of a preventative maintenance or, T&M job, and you incentivize them on the back end because they've given you the right information to go and win more business, then you will see a market, increase in your business, and you'll see a change in tune from your technicians in particular. and a better outcome for them. They'll get paid more, and they'll be spotting opportunities more and more. So I would say those are the two things that we generally talk about.
Yeah, and a couple of reactions to that. So on that last example, I believe that deep a better level of intelligence really plays into that aspect of what is it that I should be looking for when I go to service the asset that might trigger an opportunity. That's very different from saying, "Hey, keep your eyes open, find some opportunities." Right?
Yep.
It's very directed, and it can be tailored to the specific asset, to the specific technician. That's where I could see some of the applications from artificial intelligence, for example, of being very granular in those recommendations. So I really like that.
Yep. Exactly.
And
I think you can uniquely do that if you've had the history of service data for that
Mhm.
asset too, such that you can say, hey, we ran a quick, automatic analysis, and this piece of equipment has been serviced 14 times in the last 2 years, specifically to this code. We know this code probably means this is an issue that you should think about looking into. And so we can get smarter and smarter with it from an AI perspective. And I think that could be a tremendous value add for folks in the field.
yeah, absolutely. And the other thought is about closing the loop with all this information that you were talking about. So there's often this idea that all the systems, the applications, that's where data goes to die, and that is especially true from the perception of the technicians. Sometimes we see the lack of engagement being a recurrent problem year after year in our research, where um, there's a high number of high proportion of technicians that say that their company asks for feedback, but then when we say, do you get responses on that feedback? Do you feel part of the process of innovation and the follow through? The numbers start to fall below the 50%, and very rapidly so. And as we try to build loyalty, not just in the customer base, but also in our technician base, to help with process adoption, with technology adoption, with all the buy-in that is necessary for change management, I believe that closing the loop at the strategic level, but also all the way back to the technician, helps with the incentives and awarding that, but really with making them feel part of the process because they are.
Yep.
So having the right foundation that enables this is really critical in making the data capture and utilization work in the long term.
Totally. Totally. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, your technicians are your product. Like, that is what you're putting out there. They're the ones who are, doing the hard work. They're turning the wrench, they're fixing things, they're ensuring uptime. So being able to have them trust in their employer is huge. One change management thing that we've typically seen as it relates to technology is having a few technician early adopters who start using certain functionality before others, and they almost become sort of a positive feedback loop where they can go to their peers and say, hey, trust me, this is not just another new workflow. This will save you 5 minutes on every PMA you're going to go to. Trust me, you're going to want to do this. And it's another way to close the loop on things in particular, and generate some level of excitement, because change is not easy. It just isn't. Regardless, same for ServiceTitan. Anytime we introduce a new technology tool, or like Slack does an automatic update, I need to figure out how to use this thing now. So being able to get some of those early adopters and motivators within that group help, in addition to what you just talked about, which is closing the loop and making sure that the general team feels heard in terms of what are the problems they're dealing with and what are the opportunities that they see.
Great. One other persona that I want to bring into the picture before we run out the clock is the back office. Very critical in this whole interaction. I think you talked about it during your introduction. And one thing that really surprised me from our research, as we do the voice of the frontline, talked about field service technicians. We also go to the contact center agents. And while in the field, 41%, I said, think that they have too much information, and less than 5% complain about having not enough. We see the opposite situation in the back office. 4 times as likely to say that they do not have enough information versus having too much of it. So it might be because of the remote type of interaction and how they are pressed for answers, the inability to be directly in front of the asset. Um, but to me, that is very surprising. So I would love to hear your reactions first off, if this is a surprise to you as well, that the lack of enough information is such a pain point in the back office, and perhaps what are some of the um, processes, the best practices to identify what is the data that they need and enable it for them.
Yeah. This doesn't surprise me. I mean, if I think about the back office personas versus a field persona, their scope is much larger. So, as an example, if you're a technician in the field, at any given time, you may be looking at a specific asset or specific job, and that's the thing you care about. In the back office, you may be getting phone calls or emails from, God knows who was referencing a job from 3 years ago and asking questions about asset X or, invoice Y or when technician Z is going to get there. And so I think their scope typically ends up being a little bit broader in terms of what they need to know and have at their fingertips. So I think at a base level, it doesn't surprise me that they want more information, because that's always going to arm them to deliver a better customer experience by having that knowledge on that interaction with that customer in that exact instance. When I think about this, though, I don't always think about it as having as much data as possible. It's having the right data surface to them at the right time, contextual to the question that they're trying to answer. And I think about this in a couple ways. One is, there's simple user interfaces you can build that has a history of customer information and history, all at the fingertips the second a customer calls in. So, if I'm Alex working at the ServiceTitan building and I call in to my contractor, the first thing that pops up is past jobs, past appointments, assets on site, agreements, etc., past due invoices, so that I can just quickly answer the questions that I think Alex is probably going to ask. The second one, which gets a little bit interesting when you think about AI, is how do you just build an agent for these back office personas such that they can just simply ask text-based questions and get the answers they need. What was Alex's last invoice? And can you find that for me? Pops it up in 2 seconds, such that it's not that the data will exist, but they can also access it in seconds, which ultimately is what drives a really good customer experience, in our opinion.
Oh, great. I really like that, especially the part you mentioned about, again, right sizing the data and the scope being so much broader. All right, the time horizon that they have to react to, it does add a layer of complexity, and again, engaging the teams as part of the solution. I believe it's going to be critical in identifying what is the data that they want to have based on the calls that they've received in the past, rather than the ones that perhaps leadership believes that they should have, and just pushing a solution towards them. So, Alex, we've talked about the back office persona, the field service technician, the customer experience, the technology around it. There's a lot of good knowledge that you've shared. Perhaps as we're connecting the dots, do you have any closing comments as what is most critical? What have been the building blocks that continue to make a difference in this space, in order to improve that frontline experience, and by extension the customer experience and the results that you get through these longer relationships, preventative maintenance agreements that lead to the growth?
Yeah, I would say maybe a couple parting thoughts, which is one, I like to tell all of our customers, never leave a project, a job, or a location without understanding if it's under a preventative maintenance agreement, and if it's not, how you can get them under one. That's like sort of one, again, getting back to the sales side. And then two, I'm a big believer of, if you're using the right technology the right way, you will have a treasure trove of information that you can use to better serve your customers, find customers that you want to serve more of, and find more opportunities in your existing customer base to deliver value. So I would say those are the two things I would highly recommend. Apart from adopting the right technology for the right personas in your business to help them actually do the work more efficiently, getting the output of data can be a really, really valuable asset when you think about your own business in the long term, and it becomes a really valuable asset in terms of delivering a very, very strong customer experience.
I like those. And again, thank you for having shared all of this, for shedding some light on this industry. And you've told us so much about the professional side. We would love to learn a little bit more on the personal side as well. Perhaps something that you can share, a passion project, a fun story that you'd like to leave the audience with.
I have two that I'll pop in. One is more of like just a fun thing. Personal passion of mine is skiing. Actually, just this last weekend, I was in Utah skiing and took a pretty nasty tumble. So I'm unfortunately going to be out of commission for the rest of the season. But the reason I bring it up is I talked to a lot of our customers about the importance of job site safety. And this is the first time where wearing a helmet while going skiing, I think, has severely positively influenced my life. And so I have an even more, higher respect for job site safety, I think, than ever before. Granted, obviously, this is a different context. But that's number one. I think number two, I would say this is more on like the personal passion side of me. I'm Armenian. My background is, my parents moved to the States as immigrants, very similar to how Ara and Vahe, our founders, moved to the States as immigrants. And so I believe really deeply in giving back to the Armenian community. I have a lot of family in Armenia. And what's interesting for me to tie the personal with the professional is ServiceTitan actually has a large Armenia office. So for me, for the last 5 years in particular, being able to merge my personal, philanthropic, and professional parts of my career all together is something that, in addition to the great work we do at ServiceTitan, keeps me personally ticking and excited.
That's great. That's very heartwarming. And so to our listening audience, thank you again for joining us today. Today's podcast has been recorded, so you can go back and check out Alex nuggets and all the knowledge that he shared with us today. We hope to see you again in our next edition. And once again, Alex Kablanian from ServiceTitan, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.